Sometimes God says step first. Sometimes God is like, at this point, I'm not asking you to wait on me. I'm asking you to go with me. Sometimes we want God to part the river before we move, but often he parts the river after we obey. And so if you are in a season where you feel that God is asking you to do something, but it feels like there's no point because it's not gonna move the needle at all, trust the Lord. Hey fam, I'm Shanika and welcome back to What I'm Learning with God in My 30s. This is literally the honest lessons where God is carrying me through right now as I continue to heal, grow, and navigate this life and adulthood with Him. All right, so today we're actually delving into something that personally I feel led to talk about, and that's about crossing over into your promise. And I really want this episode to be one of encouragement, but also enlightenment, as I have just been learning so many different things in this season as I've just been navigating my own personal crossing over of my own Jordan. And so it's this episode is really just going to talk about how detrimental it is to have courage, to continue to be obedient, to trust the Lord, and to really walk by faith. All right, so here's a question that I've had to ask myself. And I just want to ask you, have you ever been in a situation or a period or a moment where you felt like you were literally at the edge of your promised land, but it just felt like it was so impossible and it seemed like it was still so far? If that's how you feel, I just want you to know that in many ways, the children of Israel felt that way when they also too had to cross over the Jordan with Joshua. And so I hope that and I pray that this episode really, again, blesses you and encourages you to know that in these moments, we have to be able to remember who God is, what He's done, and what He's able to do. So like I said, in many ways, that's exactly where the children of Israel were when they stood in front of the Jordan River with Joshua. It was a flooded area in that moment, and although their ancestors have gone through it with Moses, it was still something that seemed impossible in that moment. And what I've been learning in my 30s with God has been that courage is often required before the blessing. And I don't think a lot of people talk about courage and how important it is to have courage, because oftentimes we lend to the idea and obviously the importance of faith, right? But faith and belief and obedience and trusting the Lord and leaning on the Lord. But courage is the thing personally that I've learned that fuels faith. And so that is why I want us to kind of talk about this today, because I don't think that we realize how much courage it takes to have faith, especially when you are walking not by sight, but literally by what you know God has said or what the promise has been, or what you're just hoping for. And so I want to first read to you Joshua 1:9, where God says, "Be strong and courageous. Do not tremble or be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." And this is what God was telling to Joshua. You know, Joshua, again, he knows about Moses and how Moses carried the people through. And so he himself knew that in this moment he had to lead these Israelites to cross the Jordan. And so God just really wanted to really reiterate the importance of being strong and being courageous and going anyway, regardless of how impossible or regardless of how huge that obstacle was before him. And so for those of you guys who have not read Joshua at all, or you might have an idea, but you're not quite sure completely, I just want to kind of give an overall context of Joshua, just so that we all can understand as we talk throughout this episode. So basically, Israel had wandered for 40 years in the wilderness, as we know, and Moses has died at this point, and Joshua is now the leader. And so he's the one that has to lead the new generation of the children of Israel into the actual promised land. And this is where the promised land is finally in sight. So they can see it at this point. So this is no longer I'm hoping for this, or I'm hoping that eventually we'll be able to, be close enough. It's like, no, they're literally right there. This river is the only obstacle before them before they get to that promised land. So that is why it's so important. But here's the problem. The river is flooded, like I said. So it's not like, oh, we can just, guard up, guard up our loins. Gird up our loins. Loins, right? Yeah. It's not like they can just gird up their loins and be like, let's cross this river and we'll be good, even if it's waist length. It's like, no, this was flooded. So this was so impossible for them to even try to attempt on their own. This is what stood out to me because it really showed me what the metaphor of being called to cross over your Jordan means. So that means that your promise is in sight, or you're so close, you might not physically see it, but you can feel it in your spirit. Or it's just, the Holy Spirit nudging you to tell you that you're closer than you've ever been, although there's no circumstances that gives evidence to this. But the obstacle before you is so overwhelming. It's so impossible. It's so large, like a Goliath, that it almost tries to stifle out the fact that you're right at your promise. And so this is where courage becomes necessary. And this is what I was talking about earlier. So when we think about, like I said, when we think about courage, we think about, okay, courage. All right, cool. Like to have courage is like not to be afraid. So you just go, like you just have the audacity to just do something. And while that is true, courage doesn't always mean the absence of fear. Sometimes there is a lot of fear in the midst, but you still are courageous anyway. And so courage begins when God says move. And this is seen throughout Joshua 3, chapter 3, 7 through 13. So this is pretty much how what God tells Joshua, right? So he tells him that the priests have to carry the ark and they must step into the river first. He doesn't part the seas like he did with Moses. There's no staff that's being risen and then you see the seas parted and then it's like, okay, we have the clearance to go. It's like, no, the priests now have to step into this flooded river with who knows how the waves were. We could just only imagine within ourselves, right? What the waves were looking like or how it just appeared, especially when you see a large river before you. So they had to first, carrying an ark now. So this is also a heavy thing that they're carrying. They have to put the first step in. Before there's any parting of any sea, any river, they have to step in first. So before they actually saw anything happen, they had to trust God enough to say, if I step into this, he won't let me drown, that he will do whatever he's going to do to ensure that we can cross this safely and alive. And so I just want to reiterate this because I've realized in this season that God often asks for obedience without any evidence. And I think it's just so interesting because I think a lot of the times we chalk a lot of things up to obedience, but we don't really look at how God's obedience always looked in the Bible. Like anytime that there was any blessing from God, any promise from God, there was no evidence of that promise or blessing at all in the sense of what the obedience was tied to. So God could have called the person to be obedient in one area and that had nothing to do with the blessing or the promise that was given to them afterward. And so a lot of the times today, I think we get tripped up over the calling everything obedience and calling everything a blessing from God, when sometimes some things are just discipline. Like if you're disciplined enough to do a thing or you do a thing enough times, there's a level of success that comes, right? And so I want us to really picture like when you're really at your Jordan and you're really crossing over to something, there's no evidence of that promise being tied to what you're called to do. And so I'm going to talk about that further even in my own personal story, but I think that's what I want to really clarify, because you might be in a season where you're like, God is asking me to do something, but that has nothing to do with what he promised me, or that has nothing to do with the blessing that I've been praying for. It seems like it's almost a distraction, or it's almost something that's just, keeping me away from the thing I should be doing. And it's like, no, that's God, because God is telling you to do something to stretch you for a whole different reason, not for your participation to make that promise happen. He's God enough to do that on his own. What he's really calling you to do is to be stretched in your faith, in your character, in your being courageous, and also just proving him to be who he is. And so this is where like we have to have faith in him now, trust in him now, and really believe that he's able to do what he said he'll do on his own without any participation. And so we get no credit for it. We can't say, oh, I worked hard, or I grinded for this, or I did this, or I did that. It's like, no, God completely did something that I didn't even put my hand to. I just did something that he told me to do that wasn't even a part of the exercise, but in a sense, it was the exercise, because the exercise for him is internally, right? And so I just want to reiterate that for anybody that might be feeling like, I feel like God is telling me to do something that's completely opposite or completely not in line with what he promised me. And it's like, yeah, good. You're in the right company. That is God. That is how he's always worked in the Bible. If you look at from David to Abraham to Joseph to so many people, he's always given them an assignment that looked like it had nothing to do with what he promised, but it all was working together because again, he was looking at internally what that exercise was doing to them so that when he did put them in the position or in the blessing that he did put them in, they were already working out their character. They were already working out their heart posture. They were already working out their faith. And so I want you to understand that faith isn't believing after the miracle happens. Faith is stepping forward when the water is still rushing. And that is something that I've had to learn in this season. And I had an incorrect perspective of what being at the Jordan meant. Honestly, I thought that being at the Jordan meant, oh, if I could see the promised land like how the Israelites saw it, then that means I'm right across the street. So all I got to do, cross the street right quick, and I'm right at the promise. And I didn't realize that, no, it's at that Jordan. The wilderness has its own set of challenges and own set of things, but it's at that Jordan where it seems like so much things is coming at you at one time. So many distractions at one time, so many obstacles at one time, so much testing at one time. It almost creates, like I said, this impossible circumstance. And I have really understood this in this season as the Lord has been leading me through my own Jordan. And I'm like, I get it now, Lord. Now I see why you've given me insight before. Now I understand why you told me how to do certain things and what I need to do in this season specifically to be able to cross over, break, and to continue to be courageous regardless of all the things that you allow to come my way. And so, like I said, I wanted to share a bit of my personal story because, like I said, in this season, I have really been enlightened by the Lord in a lot of ways, there's been a lot of renewing of my mind in a lot of areas. And a lot of that has come through challenges. A lot of that has come through, just crying out to the Lord. A lot of that has come through conversations with my husband. A lot of it has come through just a lot of different things. But it has been something that has truly been profound, that has stuck with me for many seasons to come. God has really been just commanding me that I be courageous after a long and hard wilderness and pruning season for the past 11 years. And like I said, the wilderness has its own challenges and its own things and its own obstacles that you have to be stretched in faith in and trusting in the Lord in and submission and all of these things. But I think there's something to be said of when he asks you now to move. And so in the wilderness, you're wandering, right? So there's movement happening, but it's a different kind of movement. Like it's not necessarily the movement that it requires of you at the Jordan. Like this is now a thing of like, now you have to reemerge from the ashes of the wilderness, from the dust and the dirt and all the things that you were, maybe in that wilderness season. And now you have to emerge into something that is that shows up in a way that is like, I need you to do an assignment. So it could be a calling, it could be a job, it could be an assignment of any sort that God is asking you to now do in the midst of great impossibility, in the midst of great, you could be still grieving the wilderness. You can be afraid because you were in the wilderness for so long and you're like, Lord, I don't even know if I still got what it takes. And I think that has been me. I found myself not being as confident. Like I've lost so much confidence in the wilderness. I've lost so much tenacity and so much audacity because I was just afraid of just thinking that I just no longer have it because I just had so many losses and so much things and so much pruning that I didn't think I had any of it left. But also sometimes too, you're just afraid because you're like, Lord, you've stripped me to bare minimum. And now I don't even know what you want me to put back on. And sometimes you're like, I don't know if I should put on this pants because maybe this is not what God is calling me to do. And you're second guessing yourself or you're afraid that maybe God is like, nah, I don't want you to wear that. And so it's a lot of things that I think people don't talk about when you come out of a wilderness and you're transitioning into crossing your Jordan into your promise. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of PTSD that can happen in the midst of your wilderness if you're not renewing your mind constantly and making sure that you're submitting your thoughts to the Lord and that you're really, having conversation and you're just really dwelling in his presence, because that's where healing and transformation and the renewing of the mind happens as you read the word and you're in worship and all of those things. That's what helps you to be able to see more clearly, right? Like There were times where the children of Israel thought that they were like grasshoppers. They saw themselves so small. And sometimes the wilderness can do that to you, where you feel small because you've lost so much and you've gone through so much pruning, and you've thought that that this was something that God wanted for you. And then you realize that he was pruning that out of you, and he was telling you no, and he was taking things that you thought you loved or things that he probably put there first in the beginning, but he no longer wants there in this season. And just so many things. Sometimes you can end up feeling small, and you can lack confidence, and you can really just feel insecure and vulnerable. And I think that's why it's like, when you get to that Jordan, now I see why, just like with Joshua, like he's like, you have to be courageous. Like, I want you to know that what I left you with is enough. So even if it's a few smooth stones and a slingshot like David, it's enough. With me, it's enough. And I think that is what I've had to come to that conclusion of, like, you stripped things from me, but it wasn't things I needed. Although I thought I did, because sometimes we're stripped to the point of like our identities get stripped. Our identity gets stripped because we had idols that we didn't realize, and we were depending on things that we didn't think we were depending on more than God. And we were really, again, honed in on, even sometimes the promise becomes an idol, even though that's what he said and that's what he promised, is sometimes just what you're so focused on because you've been in such survival mode, and you've always just been trying to make it, and you're always just trying to strive or thrive into something, that you can make even the promise an idol. And it's like, no, we have to realize that it's God's presence that is more than enough. And so when he strips us of things, it's because he's like, I want to show that I am God. I want to show that it doesn't require anything of you to do. Even if I ask you to never do a thing, just know that I can do all things. And I think that is what I've had to realize, and I've had to sit in confidence. And that in itself has helped me to maneuver as I'm rebuilding my confidence, to know that it's no longer confidence in me. The world tells us that we're supposed to be super confident, and we're supposed to have this level of arrogance and this level of like, almost delusion to ourselves, to think that I'm great and I can do this, and I can tackle this, and I'm this, and I'm the one that steps in the room, and I'm the one that's that, I'm the girl, and I'm, all of these things. And when we are, but as believers, now we're called to be like, no, it's not confidence in ourselves. It's confidence in God. Even with our gifts and our talents that he gives us, it's confidence in him, though, not in ourselves. It's not about our gift and how eloquently we can do a thing or how easy it comes to us. It's like, no, this is now I have to have confidence in God. He strips you enough for you to not have anything left that can say it gets the credit beyond him. And so that is what I have been learning and have been using to rebuild my confidence now in him. And yes, he's using my hand and using my mouth and using, my creativity and all the things that he has given me. But at the same time, it's him that I'm having my confidence in. It's him that I'm focusing on. It's his presence that I'm like, it's because you're with me why I'm able to even cross. And so that is just the things that I've just been learning and just been praying through, and have just, like I said, been talking through with my husband, and just reading the word and just really researching commentary and just understanding how does it look to have courage, and how to cultivate that more, and just all of these things that sometimes we just read the word and we don't sometimes just like Google a little bit commentary on like, what did that verse truly mean? Or what's the more in-depth thing of that verse? Or maybe a word that Jesus used that is like, what does that mean? Or how do you get to that? Or how do you get to that in God? Those are ways that helps us to further cultivate and permeate into, God's will and his way and the way that he wants us to do things. And so, so that has been just really my season. And in the midst of that, I've been praying, and I've always been, making sure that I'm spending more time with him, cultivated intentional time daily now. That has been for the past year, especially. I've cultivated that, and in prayer, like I said, I've learned to not just pray about my circumstances, but also pray about heart posture, pray about, what are the things that, you want me to see better? What are things from my past that you want me to let go of? What are perspectives and unbeliefs that I'm still carrying, that I'm struggling through because of my past, or because of what I've gone through, or because of other people? And, as I've prayed and even in supplication too about my circumstances in different areas, I've realized in this season that he has seldom addressed my circumstances. A lot of the times he actually he actually answers either through giving me scriptures that just reiterate who he is and what he's able to do, or he has actually just reiterated what he's asked me to do, which is whatever he's called me to do in this season, whatever that calling is in ministry, or however he's given me and my husband insight in what we're called to do. And so at some point I was like, wow, Lord, like you just literally like grazing over a lot of like the stuff I'm praying about, my supplications. Like, some of these things are dire. Some of these things are like pressing. Some of these things is huge. And you have yet to address it, but it's not like you're not talking to me, because you are, but you're not talking to me about that. And it has not been until recently, like I said, that I've really understood what it means to be at the Jordan and why he said to be courageous, because he's not addressing it because it's something he can change in an instant. He doesn't require my participation this time. And I think sometimes it gets hard to trust him in new ways and in new circumstances, because maybe he's carried you through a similar thing before, but he did it a different way. And I think that was my thing. Like, I've been in certain situations financially or, personally before, that he used a different resource or a different way before to get us out of it. And then it's like, well, now we're in this similar situation, but you're not using those same resources or you're not using those same ways. So now it gets harder to trust you, because I'm like, well, Lord, if you're not doing it that way, then does that mean you're not doing it at all? And I've had to learn that no, he doesn't have to do things twice. God is a creator. So therefore his ways that he makes is literally limitless, right? So he might have done something in a previous season or another previous season that he's not going to do again this same way. Just like how we see with the Israelites, right? We see the children of Israel with Moses. He caused Moses to lift up his staff and raise it up, and the Red Sea parted, and they were able to walk through. With Joshua, that's not the case. He has the priests holding an ark, and he's telling them, you got to step in first. And as you step in, then I will part the seas and you will walk through. And so a lot of the times we get caught up and we get tripped up by the fact that God is not doing something the same way he did it before. And it's like, well, yeah, because he's God. And so now we got to have a new, deeper level of trust. And that's something that I've had to wrestle with. I've had to pray through, lament through, and just really submit to the Lord. But as I have done that in honesty, he has truly helped to comfort me, and he has truly been compassionate and merciful in just, comforting me in that, and just really helping me to get through that and to learn to trust him in a new way. And that's the thing about the Father. He's patient. And so that is why it's so important for us to pray honestly to him and just really be honest about how we feel, whether it's good or bad, because he's able to handle it. He's God. He doesn't shy away from our honest feelings. He actually wants us to come to him with that, because then now he can pour into us the confidence and the love and the peace and the joy and the comfort that we need, so desperately need. And so, so that has just been like I said, this has been my season, and is what I've been learning as I've just understood the metaphor of crossing over the Jordan now. And I've seen his goodness in a lot of ways that I didn't see before. And that's one thing that I think we oftentimes call him out in the big things, like the healings and the miracles. And he made ways and he created provision and he did these things. But there are a lot of things as a good father that God shows us in the midst of the wilderness seasons, in the midst of our low seasons, in the midst of our challenging seasons, that we might not even know that he even cares about, but he does. Every intricate part of our life he cares about. And so that is just something that I have also experienced in this season of my life, where I've seen God to do some things big and small in some ways that I didn't even know that he cared to do, right? And I think that's one of the things that we have to also understand as we walk through our season. So regardless of what season you're in, you might be starting in your wilderness and pruning season. You might be halfway out. You might be coming out now and you're at the Jordan, or you might be even in your promised land right now. Either way, understand that seeing God's goodness in different ways is something that you learn deeply in his presence, deeply in prayer, deeply in relationship with him. And so, like I said, now as I'm commanded to walk by faith and reemerge in a new way in my assignment now, I'm learning to truly have confidence in him and have courage to completely do it his way, regardless of the fact that I don't see results, regardless of the fact that I don't see my circumstances changing. And regardless of the fact that it looked like it's not even working. And I have to really believe who he is and who he says he is in his word, based on experience in my life, based on just everything. And so that is just really what I want to implore on anyone that is watching, that is feeling discouraged. You have to focus on who he is, not just the things that you often read about in the word only, but also what he's been to you. Because even if we are honest, a lot of the times we overlook the ways that God shows up because either they're not big ways or we just don't even realize them because, again, we just don't take the time. But when you do look back over your life, you will see all the times that his hand was in it, all the times that he's protected you through things and kept you through things and made ways out of no way and created ways and out of no way and just did all of the things that you never thought that he cared to do or that he would do for you. And so it's so important for us to never forget that. And so, yeah, so if you're waiting for confirmation, clarity, safety, any of those things, sometimes God says step first. And we have to be willing to step first. We have to be willing to be courageous enough to go first. And so the water, like I said, the water didn't stop until they stepped in. And this is in Joshua 3:14-16. And so when the priest's feet actually touched the water, the river stopped, and it was not before that. And so the lesson here, like I said, is courage is cultivated through obedience in motion, not waiting. And so sometimes God is like, at this point, I'm not asking you to wait on me. I'm asking you to go with me. And so as you walk and as you go with me, I will do my part and I will unfold things and I will do what I need to do to ensure that you get to that promise that I called you to. So sometimes we want God to part the river before we move, but often he parts the river after we obey. And so like he did with Moses and the children of Israel, they had to walk up to the water and Moses had to raise the staff. So either way, they had to do something. They had to have faith enough to actionably do something in order for God to say, okay, now I'm going to do the rest. And so if you are in a season where you feel that God is asking you to do something, but it feels like there's no point because it's not going to move the needle at all, trust the Lord. That is what I am having to do and have had to do in plenty of seasons. Trust the Lord, because if he's calling you to do something, he's not caring about it moving the needle. He will move the needle. He just wants to know that you're courageous enough and have belief enough in him to say, I'm willing to obey and give you my yes, even when it looks like I don't see a way out at all. And so I want you to understand, if that comes in the form of career shifts, ministry calling, leaving an unhealthy environment, trusting God for provision, whatever the case may be, just go. Sometimes you have to just be courageous enough to step first. And so I just want to break down a little bit before we close what is courage and how to cultivate it, because of course I always love to give practical steps and ideas for you to be able to actually implement this yourself. So finding courage when crossing the Jordan is a metaphor for facing intense, life-altering, or overwhelming transitions. It comes from shifting focus from the magnitude of the obstacle to the presence and promises of God. In the biblical account, this required spiritual preparation, intentional obedience, and a reliance on divine rather than human strength. And so here's the how. This is how we cultivate our courage in this season, regardless of what season you're in. Shift your focus to God's presence. So you got to remember that you're not alone. You have to trust in his supernatural power and his ability and his sovereignty. And you have to look to God to be your sanctuary and your refuge. So even in the midst of the intensity and the spiritual warfare and the things that seem impossible, you have to focus on the Lord and understand that he is your safe haven, that he is sovereign and he is above all. Secondly, you have to take actionable steps of faith. So you got to, like I said, take the first step. Consecrate yourself and obey and remain faithful regardless of your feelings. And that is something that God has really been walking me through, because sometimes I can get so overwhelmed by the fact that so much is happening and it's just, again, it's so intense that you can feel anxious and you can feel weary and downtrodden and like, I don't feel like doing this anymore, or I want to give up, or, I feel depressed, or whatever it might be for you. Those feelings are very real, but at the same time, we have to be able to be faithful regardless of those feelings. We got to still keep going regardless of those feelings and pray to God for strength and for peace and for joy and for a settled mind and a sound mind so that we can continue to keep going. And then third, change your perspective. Don't fear the unknown. View obstacles as opportunities for God to perform. Walk vigilantly, but also boldly. And that's something too that I've had to also learn in this season as well, like changing my perspective, not seeing it for what I see it as. Like, yes, the winds and the waves are great. Like when Jesus was on the boat with the disciples, yes, but Jesus is on the boat. Like Jesus is on the boat. Like you're good. Like Jesus ain't gonna die. You ain't gonna he not gonna make you die. He's here. So when you understand that God is with you and you're not alone, it changes your perspective. Like, yes, sometimes we gotta walk through things and we gotta endure through things, but when we're not doing it alone and we're doing it with the God of all creation, the emperor of the universe, the one who is sovereign above everything, like that gives a little bit of peace, a little bit of assurance to know that I got to come out of this some way, shape, or form alive. Like I might be a little battered and torn, but it's nothing that's going to kill me. And so I think that is one of the major things that I've had to learn. And that is something that is going to be what the enemy is going to try to use to change your perspective on the thing. He's going to try to keep you focused on all the bombardments and the intensity and the impossibility and the circumstances and your feelings. And he's going to try to amplify all those things and get you mentally to not be focused and to be distracted and all of these things. But it's so important to keep your perspective intact. And last but not least, work on your inner strength. You got to stay in the word. You got to remember your past victories and you got to surrender control. And that is what I've also had to learn to maneuver through as well. Staying in the word is the anchor, the key. And a lot of the times we think we read the word just to read it, but no, you want to read it to understand to really know who God is. Like that is the whole point. And especially the Old Testament, but even the New, all of it tells us who God is. But the Old Testament specifically shows us so many circumstances and so many people that have gone through different things that God has been with them faithfully through and has carried them through and has made them victorious through. And so if there's a place that you want to start, it's the Old Testament to really see how God has been faithful and he has been a man of his word in every circumstance, regardless of who he's used and regardless of what the circumstance has been. And so those are just some ways to really just cultivate courage. And that's just to keep courage going so that you continue to walk in faith and continue to be faithful and continue to trust in the Lord. And so, like I said, like the work on the inner strength where I was saying, remember your past victories, this goes into even what he told Joshua. And so God tells them to remember the moment. And this is in Joshua 4:1-7. So after crossing, God instructs them to take 12 stones from the riverbed. And why he asked that is to build a memorial. And this is something that we see throughout the Old Testament that many people like Abraham and so many people have done every time that the Lord has made a provision or has done something in their life. They make a memorial as a remembrance, a place to remember what he's done. And like now that we don't do that physically, I feel like it makes it hard for us it makes it easy for us to easily forget what God has done. But it's like, no, make your own memorial, whatever that looks like, whether that's in your mind, whether that's writing it down in a journal, writing it down on a calendar, a board, whatever it is, like make a memorial to remember what God has done. And so the purpose of this was so future generations will ask what happened here, and they will be able to hear about the goodness of the Lord and what he did and the miracle that he did like he's done before. And so I want you to know that God wants us to remember the moments when he made a way, no matter how big or small they are. And I've been guilty of forgetting a lot of the times, not on purpose, but sometimes when circumstance or a new thing is just so intense and great, you forget. And it's like, no, but there's something similar that he's brought me through or something completely different that was just as big then, but is looking back now, I see like, wow, God brought me through. I was stressing and thinking it was so impossible for nothing because he was right there willing and ready to bring me through. So remembering is so key because that helps us to also, again, build our trust in the Lord because it's like he brought you out then. So why do you not think he's going to bring you out now? Sometimes we let the enemy get into our heads, or sometimes we get into our own heads about the mistakes we've probably made along the way, or the things we probably did, or the ways that we think we're just, not worthy enough of him coming through for us again. But don't believe those lies. Understand that God is faithful. And if he promised you something and he said that he has a work that he's going to complete, he's promising that he's going to complete it and he's going to do that. And so just remember what he's done, no matter how big or small it has been. And so what I'm just learning overall in my 30s with God on this and just everything is that one thing I'm learning in this season is that courage doesn't mean you aren't afraid. It just means that you trust God enough to move even when the river is still rushing and the winds and waves are boisterous. It just means you still go anyway and you still trust the Lord anyway. And so understand that you got to be a steward of what he's called you to. You have to be obedient in what he's called you to. You have to trust him with your gifts, and you have to step into your calling and trust him with the results. Don't worry about the results. Don't worry about trying to make it work. Again, like I oftentimes quote Matthew 6:33, where he says, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God and all of the things that are righteous, and he will add the things. He will add the things that you need." And so you don't have to worry about trying to add things or create results or trying to make something work. He will make it work. He just wants you to be obedient, to trust him, and to be focused more on him and his kingdom and what he's called you to do first. And so if you feel like you're standing at your own Jordan right now, I just want you to remember these three things. One, God promises often sit on the other side of our courage. Two, the miracle may not come until you step forward. And three, what feels impossible today may become tomorrow's testimony. And so I just want you to remember that crossing your Jordan isn't about being fearless. It's about being obedient and trusting God in the midst of your fear. And when you stand on that other side of that river after you've done it, trust me, like he says in 1 Peter, I think it's 5 verse 10, where he says, after you've suffered a while, that I'll make you perfect, established, and strengthened. Like when you cross over that to that promise, you're going to see that all of that was worth it. And you're going to see the reasoning for all of what you've had to go through. You'll see the reasoning for even the standing at the Jordan and seeing the promise, but having to still cross this impossible situation. And so I just really pray that this, episode really helps you wholeheartedly. I pray that it encourages you, and it just allows you to just seek the Lord and seek his presence and sit in his presence and just cultivate that courage that he's asking you to have in this moment of walking by faith. You know what I mean? And so I just want to thank you so much for watching as always. Again, as always, if you have a prayer request, please do let me know. You don't have to even share the details. It could just be something general. Or if it's just about this, if you feel like you are at this point in your life where you're at your Jordan and you're getting ready to cross and you just want to have prayer for courage or strengthening in your faith or in your hope or in your trust in the Lord or whatever it may be, just please leave it in the comments. I would love to pray with and for you. And as always, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss another episode of What I'm Learning in My 30s, as well as other content that I have on this channel with my Bible series, my Bible verse series, and my vlogs. Again, thank you. I love you, and I will see you again soon.